when an African woman does manage to make a film, let's say a full-length feature, she often does not get to make a second one. And as for a third, that is extremely rare, and especially if she stays on the continent. So there is no prospect of a career for African women filmmakers. You will find that people who have made really good first, second films really stumble with their third, and it's very rare to go beyond that. I have noticed that there are not many films in the world where African women are the protagonists. And this is not just a thing that happens in certain areas, it happens across the world because film is something that can travel. And so, being an African woman myself, I would imagine that if these films existed, I would be in places where I get to see them. But I very seldom get to see an African woman on the screen. Of course, we see more African American women and more melanated women from other parts of the world. But women from the actual continent are few and far between. And so I began to ask myself why this is the case. And clearly, one can see the relationship of film to the global structures that we have, where African women are seen as some of the beings on this planet, the human beings on this planet, who are least human, who are most like beasts of burden. This is why often when you see photographs of African women, they are carrying things on their head. They're out in fields using very basic technology, because this is the idea that the world has about such people. So when you understand that this is the idea about African women, it becomes clear why the world is not structured in such a way as to allow African women to tell their stories. This is changing in literature, but in the area of film, which is so much more controlled by capital, which is by power, that change is not so apparent yet. People who have been affected by colonization and its systems that buttressed it and reinforced it are still in such an underprivileged situation that they don't have, first of all, the time to engage with such issues. They are so busy just trying to live in very challenging economic environments that they simply do not have the time to engage with those issues. Secondly, often, especially on the African continent, governments can be repressive. So discourse in locations where there should be intellectual engagement is not happening at an intellectual level. Discourse has largely been hijacked by politics. And so we have political discourse, but not so much intellectual discourse. So I think it's going to take some time before we get to a stage where cinema as a medium can really engage with that issue. We are still catching up. As people from Africa, we are still catching up on the basics. We are still beginning to make documentaries about our struggles, about our cities, about the everyday life of the people, about people who were silenced also by the political institutions that followed independence. We are still doing that work. Of course, cinema is available to that, but the practicalities are daunting. You also need money to make a film, even if it's a simple documentary. You need money. And the money will probably come from people who would not be particularly happy to have a conversation about reparations. And so these are some of the contradictions that make it difficult for cinema to be very current in terms of the issues that are very pertinent to the South. If we on the continent sit down and analyze film, what it is as a historical medium that has a history of development, it can help us to understand how we can use it to serve our own purposes. So I think this is definitely possible. But Film is not something, again, that is available to everybody in terms of filmmaking, because it is a source of power, and power is very tightly controlled. So the people who have access to moving images in countries like mine would be people who are closely associated with the ruling elites. And their intention is not so much to create an industry, but to use an industry to reinforce their hold on power. My fundamental experience in the times that I have been mentoring over the past 2 decades has been that technical skills can be acquired more easily than the actual narrative skills. People see a film and they understand that it is a succession of moving images. And so they believe that a film is a succession of moving images. Now, for me, as somebody coming from writing and script writing, I am aware that a film is not a succession of moving images. A film is a story that is told through the medium of moving images. And where there is not education in the arts, it is very difficult for people to understand that. Women are less likely to push themselves forward. And so you will find that women end up doing the kind of service jobs. Like they will be the assistants, they will do continuity, they will do hairdressing and this kind of thing. But they are not heading up departments, and definitely they are not key crew. Very rarely. I did some research when I did a consultation in Kenya some years ago, and what I did see was that even when equipment was available, young women were less likely to go out and pick up a camera and just see how it works, press the buttons until it works, and, start taking pictures. I thought about this and I thought, how does it work in the home? A girl is probably doing a lot of housework, and she's probably using the crockery that's in the house and utensils. And if she picks something up and breaks it, she's going to get into trouble. So there is a socialization not to be experimental with objects that girls get into. What colonization did is that already before people spoke about it, it created a global structure where the South became like the slum of the world. And so this means that it is very difficult to break through that economic setup that has put the global South in the context of a slum. And so thinking about that made me realize that I cannot think about representation without thinking about the current world order in which we live. And since the current world order is not working for me and the representations I want to make, or even the representations I want to see, I have to think about, well, how can I engage with this world order to create some space for these things that I want to see happen to occur? And this is where I revisited a philosophy, a worldview called Ubuntu, which is basically about how to become a person being a human being who can live well with everything around oneself. And this idea of living well is also something that occurs in global northern philosophical traditions. So I think one of the key issues is, what does it mean to live well? We all agree that we want to live well, but we have different ideas about what living well means. So I am at this moment also exploring this framework of Ubuntu to see what I can actually distill for it that is relevant for today. I call it Ubuntu 2.0 because obviously the original Ubuntu emanated from a particular set of economic situations and ways of producing. So they cannot simply be taken as they were and used today. But I think if now that I conceive of a meta Ubuntu, if you like, I will be able to go back and find more knowledge that can be useful today that I would like to then present.